should bulk first or cut first, and what your macro should be, and how you would measure your progress, this is going to be a great video for you. Because in this video, I'm going to break down the science, the application. I'll show some examples of clients that have gone through different phases based on their body fat percentage and when they made changes and what we were looking for, and a lot of nuance with that. And so this video is going to be for you if you're wondering, should I bulk or cut first? Should I focus on building muscle or losing fat? Those words are sometimes interchangeable, so I want to cover both of those. What should my macros be for bulking and cutting? What is a bulking diet versus what is a cutting diet? I think the answer will surprise you there. How do I measure my progress? Am I in starvation mode? Why can't I gain weight? Or why can't I lose weight? Why can't I gain weight? How do I make sure that I make weight loss more sustainable? That's another one that we'll address in this video. And so what we're going to cover is first nutrition phases. And this is going to be something that will be really helpful for you if you've just looked at nutrition as just dieting, and that's either on a diet or you're not a diet. There's actually a lot more that we can focus on there. So we'll go over the lengths of the phases. I'll cover some common myths, examples of those phases, and clients that I've worked with that have, like I said, gone through fat loss phases, building phases, when we changed, why we changed. We'll cover all that in the nuance. And then we'll cover setting macros for each phase. So if you want to know your macros, if you want to know how to calculate it, measure it, track it, set it, all that stuff, that will be at the end. So first off, phases. I'm going to get my mug out of the way here. I like to call it these 6 phases. So I call it gear up, fat loss, diet break, maintenance, building, or a mini cut. So gearing up is essentially when you start a training and nutrition plan, you might spend a little bit of time getting up to speed on your training plan, grocery shopping, establishing habits. You might not run into something right away. And that can sometimes be what leads to you starting a diet and then crashing really fast because you didn't have the foundational elements in place first. So that'll be 1 to 4 weeks, kind of just depends on the individual and their caloric intake. It's typically going to be maintenance. Then you've got fat loss, 8 to 16 weeks. And what you're looking at for there, is 500 calorie deficit per day, roughly 300 or 3,500 calories is going to be a pound of fat. And so depending on how much weight you have to lose, a pound or 1% of your body weight a week is great progress, while also making sure that you maintain your muscle mass. Diet break is going to be something that's super helpful for people who are in the middle of a fat loss phase. Maybe they're 12 weeks in and they want to go on vacation and they're just kind of burnt out on tracking and burnt out on being in a deficit, and their biofeedback is showing that. That will be a great time to focus on improving biofeedback and improving mental health, soreness, sleep, digestion, really just helping the individual recover. And that's going to be done at maintenance. Then there's just maintenance. And this could be where you're just, hey, I'm going to maintain things for a month. I'm going to go on vacation, or I'm just going to enjoy this month and focus maybe on work or my family. And that's going to be something that you can also just do forever. I don't think the goal for people should be to track their food religiously for the rest of their life, or to always be focusing on what phase am I in. Eventually you get to a point to where you can eat intuitively, but that intuition needs to be trained with inputs and pattern recognition so that it is actually attuned to what is reality and not your feelings. So that's really about sustainable habit development and improving biofeedback. Then there's building. That is when you are focusing on the scale going up and building muscle. 3 to 12 months, really going to be dependent on how much you want to build. And there'll be diet breaks or mini cuts within that time. Roughly 25 or roughly 250 calories per day in that surplus. Could be less, could be more, depending on your training age and your actual age and how active you are. But the goal here is to increase muscle strength, performance. And then a mini cut is going to be really helpful during a building phase where maybe you get a little bit more fluffy than you want, don't feel as comfortable in your body, and it's a little bit more subjective. But a mini cut 4 to 8 weeks could just be a really quick, aggressive cut to get you back into a good range to be in a building phase. So I want to address some common misunderstandings here. And I got this grizzly bear because I think this is one of my favorite ways to articulate whether or not you are on a diet. Being on a diet, a lot of times for people means, hey, I'm trying to lose weight. And ultimately, weight loss is going to happen in a calorie deficit. And you can reference this study and probably hundreds of other studies in whether or not calories in, calories out is the model to be looking at. Your calories out will change based on your hormones, based on the health of your system, based on a number of different factors, your age, your thyroid. There's so many things that play a role, your muscle tissue, how well you're sleeping. But ultimately, the calories in, calories out model impacts your weight going up and down. So you can be on a diet, you can be on keto and gaining weight. It just depends on how much of the food you're consuming is in relation to the energy you're expending. Then there's I'm in starvation mode. This study here, the Minnesota starvation experiment, is one that probably wouldn't be approved now because it was pretty extreme, but it put like 400 guys on a 16 to 1800 calorie um, diet, or calorie intake, and they lost 2 to 2.5 pounds a week and were emaciated. And I think another way to think about, am I in starvation mode? Why can't I lose weight? This study is an extreme version of, if you didn't eat at all, you would lose weight. I do not recommend that. But to say I'm in starvation mode, I can't lose weight, while at the same time looking at someone who's a prisoner of war who actually is not eating, they are never overweight. And so it just really comes down to, and this study will kind of break down what happens is your hunger cues and your body's need to have fat on the body when you restrict so much ultimately leads to you then going and saying, all right, I need food, I need energy. Big binges will happen. So you might be starving 6 days out of the week or 14 days in a row, and then boom, a big binge comes. And a lot of times that'll be what happens. Then there is the I can't gain weight misconception. This study here does a really good job of just breaking down how obese individuals versus really lean individuals have a lot more unconscious NEAT. Obese individuals in the study were just naturally sitting 2 times more than individuals who are just leaner, and they ended up just walking more. And I think that's one where if you have a hard time gaining weight, there's a lot of subconscious energy expenditure that you're just not aware of. So let's look at body fat percentages here. I'll get my mug out of the way here. And so this is going to be very dependent on the individual. Some people store fat in different areas, and this is not 100% applicable to every individual, but these are going to be rough ranges for where you're going to start to see muscle definition, ab development, pec development, or, instead of pecs, maybe it's man boobs. It really just depends on the individual, like I said, and how much muscle you have. But the thing that I want to hammer home here is that people will say, they'll look at the photos in, let's say, 10% or 8%. They'll be like, man, this guy in 8%, he added so much more muscle. They'll see a before and after. But in reality, he just decreased his body fat percentage and more muscle was revealed. Which brings me to common misunderstanding number two, the phrase, I want to build muscle and lose some fat. Most of the time, in my experience working with 450 plus individuals, and even just seeing stuff on the internet of people who will message me on social media, like, hey, I want to lose muscle, I want to build fat. Here's my body fat percentage. Here's where I'm at. They really just want to reveal more muscle. And that's why I have this picture of a, what is this? Tide coming in and tide coming out. And the analogy here is that when the tide goes out, more rocks are revealed. When the tide comes in, rocks are covered up. So if you reduce your body fat percentage, you're going to show more muscle. Now you can grow and build the muscle so that at a medium tide, those rocks are visible. But if you want to see more muscle, reducing your body fat percentage will reveal more muscle. Did you build muscle, or was that muscle already there and you simply revealed it? That's an important nuance, because a lot of people will spend a lot of time being like, oh, I want to do this, I want to build muscle. And then we focus on building muscle and they're like, oh, I can't see it. Well, it's like, hey, we got to reduce body fat percentage to see that muscle. But if you don't have a lot of muscle and you don't have time in a building phase, then when you pull that tide all the way out to reveal the muscle, there's not a lot of muscle there. So it really just is a subtle perspective shift, I would say, in understanding what do you want and what is going to happen when you do get to high tide or low tide. And is that actually what you want? Next one is going to be, I don't want to get too bulky. So a lot of times people will have higher body fat percentages while they are strength training and say, oh, I'm getting bulky. But in reality, they just have a higher body fat percentage. If the tide went out, they reduce their body fat percentage, they would be leaner, even though maybe they did build muscle. And then this one, he put on so much muscle, looking at before and after photos. That's what I was referencing here. So that's where you're essentially looking at two individuals and saying, oh my gosh, look at how much more muscle this guy put on. But let's just say those were two the same individual. He just reduced body fat percentage. More muscle is now visible because there's less fat covering the muscle tissue. All right, so now let's get into some examples of how this all rolls out. So here, is an example of a couple clients who, were 35 plus body fat percentage. And here's how you would think about planning this out for yourself over the course of a year. And I'll go over some caveats, but just start in the top section first. So, month, let's say we're starting in January, the first phase is going to be gearing up, right? You're getting all of your equipment, you're making sure that you're squared away, you're building some habits, and then boom, we enter a fat loss phase. So let's say you start at 250. One caveat here could be that 250 is a very muscle bound individual, could be that 250 is a 5'6" individual and they are 35, 40%. Depends on your height, depends on how much muscle you have currently on your frame. But let's just say 250 pounds, 300 pounds, doesn't matter. Body fat percentage is 35 plus, 35% plus. So looking at 1% of your body weight a week, if someone was 250 pounds, 1% would be 2.5. That would be 10 pounds in 4 weeks. That is great progress. So if we just kind of pulled that down and looked at, anywhere from, like I said, 1 pound a week to 1% of your body weight a week, 8 pounds lost per month, 250, 242, 234, 226. Boom. Let's say we get to 225, 25 pounds down after 4 months. And they're just kind of feeling worn out. They're burnout. They had a really stressful period at work. So we go on a diet break to bring biofeedback signs up. They get sleeping a little bit better. They're no longer having the cravings that they're having. There's a number of different things that you want to look at with the individual for holistic health outside of just, is the weight going up? Is the weight going down? Are we seeing fat loss? We want to make sure that, sleep's in a good spot. Inflammation's in a good spot, digestion's in a good spot, looking at all these biofeedback signs. So that's where a diet break might make sense. So we go on a diet break and then boom, we go back into a fat loss phase, 225, 218, 211, and I made this 7 pounds of loss because as you get leaner, that 1% of body weight loss per week is going to also decrease. A 135-pound individual is not going to lose 1% of their body weight per week and do that in a healthy and sustained way. So then let's say we get to September, they've got a really stressful work period where they're traveling a bunch and it makes sense. Hey, let's just maintain where we're at, focus on training, focus on sleep so that we don't keep you too stressed out. Keep in mind, being in a calorie deficit is stressful for your metabolism. You're giving your body less energy than it needs to do its normal functions. So being in a calorie deficit is stressful on your system, but we can manage that stress by adjusting things from a training standpoint or going into maintenance phases. So we go into maintenance phase and then boom, back into a fat loss phase. And so maybe you get 60 pounds off and you're like, wow, I feel really good. Then we could apply something like a reverse diet, building phase, maintenance, or something else. But this could be a year. This could be 2 years if you have more weight to lose. But the way I would think about this is that you want to have intentional phases for your nutrition and align that with your training. I'm not going to go over training in this video, but I would think of this as, hey, every 6 to 8 weeks, we're changing up training slightly to match the intensity that is needed to either build muscle, improve strength, while also making sure that we're not burning out the individual. So it might be a 3-day split if we're in a big deficit so that the individual can recover more. If we're in a building phase, it might be a 6-day split because we want to make the most of the training stimulus and the additional food that the individual is having. So big caveat here, and you'll see this in the next video, progress is not linear. If you're expecting to just lose 1% of your body weight every single week and never have ups and downs and failures, I don't know what to tell you, like that's part of life. So progress is not linear. Life events can extend and shorten these phases. So I just had a newborn. That's a great example of a life event where I might not be as focused on a fat loss phase or a muscle building phase. I want to spend more time and mental focus on my baby. So newborn, work stress, travel, poor biofeedback. I don't ever want to sacrifice, and I wouldn't recommend you to sacrifice your holistic health at the altar of the almighty scale. So make sure that you are tracking that biofeedback and taking into account the holistic health of yourself. And if everything looks good, by all means, continue with that fat loss phase. Performance and longevity goals will improve at the same time. If you've got high blood pressure, if you got high cholesterol, if you have, sore knees, low back pain, and you're not exercising and you're eating like trash, those things will improve as you lose weight and as you get stronger. The pain in your knees, the pain in your back, getting more movement in is going to help that. And so when someone has a ton of weight to lose, the biggest bang for buck thing you can do is get the weight off. A lot of things will get cleaned up. And so I always say like, hey, let's make the main thing, but a lot of times you can see improvements in a number of different areas just by getting active and just by improving nutrition habits. I would say here too, you can build muscle and lose fat just simply because you have so much additional energy on your body. If your protein's where it needs to be, if you're sleeping really well, if you're training really hard, the body's got an environment to build muscle. And then you're going to see that scale coming down, maybe not as fast. I actually want to take that back. You can definitely still see the scale come down really fast, but you will get to a point to where when you start to, maybe get to this 198, 192 range, he's losing 6 pounds, 2 pounds in a week. The additional muscle will add weight to your frame. But if you're in like the 250 and you see a 5 pound jump after 2 weeks, you didn't put on 5 pounds of muscle. We'll go over rate of gain for muscle building, but yeah, let's go to this next section because this is going to be a helpful visual. So this is an individual working with currently. This was 10-1. They're 270, 110 to 131. So that was about October, November, December, January. So 3.5 months in, they were feeling really burnt out. Work was really stressful. So we went into a diet break and just kind of maintained right here. So you'll see that the scale kind of stick at that average. This is in the way for me, so I'm trying to see this at 236. So 236 for about 3 weeks. And then I was like, all right, cool. You're feeling better. Things are in a much better spot. Let's go back into a fat loss phase. Now we're getting to 714, 724. So about middle of July, they're 193. And you'll see a little bit of a flat line here. This is, an intentional phase where they want to just kind of focus on different things while still, tracking their food, training hard, but we're in a little bit of a maintenance phase here to make sure that biofeedback's good. So with all this, it is linear when you zoom out. One of my favorite sayings when it comes to body composition or just health and fitness in general is when in doubt, zoom out. If you just focus on the individual days, like you could look here and say, oh my gosh, the sky's falling. This would have been in probably March, 5 pound jump. What's happening? But then 3 weeks later, you're at an all-time low. And so if you're looking at, let's say, like a stock, you would never look at the Amazon charts at a, hourly basis and make decisions off that. You zoom out over 5 years, you're like, wow, things are actually going really well. So win it out, zoom out, look at the big picture and see how far you've come. All right. So let's say you're more 20, 25%, and you want to get the fat off and maybe go into a muscle building phase afterwards. So what we're looking at here, we'd still, let's say, do we start January, we gear up, enter a fat loss phase, 5 pounds per week, diet break, 5 pounds per week, diet break, and then 220 to 185. Again, that's going to be dependent on the individual, how tall they are, how much muscle they had on their frame previously, how well they built muscle. But let's say they get to 185 and they're like, man, I feel really good. Well, you might go into a maintenance phase and then focus on building muscle. So caveats here is that fat loss is going to start in the extremities. So your hands, your arms, your feet, your legs, the torso is going to be the last place to go. The, butt, the pecs. There are times where people have just genetic preferences where their body stores muscle in certain areas. And sometimes that's just, they're lucky and they got a big butt or they got big pecs or big arms. And that's just where they store fat. But typically you'll see body loses weight last around the torso. That's where the digestive system is. That's the last place to go. You can't spot reduce. Upper abs are going to become visible around 15, maybe a little bit more, but around 15, maybe 20%. Again, if you already have big abs and you've already trained a lot, they might become more visible because, again, if that tide is coming out and there's big rocks, those rocks are going to be more visible sooner. And it also just depends on where the individual stores fat as well. Performance may dip towards the end of the fat loss phase. So let's say you're in this phase 190, 185, 185, you're kind of feeling sluggish in the gym. You're no longer seeing yourself progress strength wise. You're no longer recovering. It takes you 3 days for your hamstrings to recover. That might be a sign, hey, we either need to go into a diet break, maintenance mode, or that's something that you can expect as you get towards the end of your fat loss phase and you start to approach 15, 12% body fat. Again, it's going to be really dependent on the individual. Maintaining muscle during this fat loss phase is going to be something you definitely want to do so you don't lose the weight. And then you're like, what did I do this for? Kind of in that skinny fat frame. Proper sleep, protein intake, and training frequency, and making sure that you're training hard is going to be the best thing you can do to make sure that you maintain your weight. Right here, you're looking at an individual 191 to 165 ish. And so we were able to maintain a lot of the muscle because we kept a lot of the nutrition and training in check. Here we're looking at on the right, I think it's like a 45-pound difference. And this dude added probably 60 pounds to his bench, 50 pounds to his squat. I'm trying to remember all the numbers, but essentially, like, he got stronger over the 6, 7, 8 months that he was losing those 40 pounds. And now the dude's well over the 1,000-pound club. He wasn't there at 260. He's there now at 215. This one I want to just show here because you'll see he tracked the 191 and it came down to 171. But I used to have people track in a Google tracking doc, which you can actually get in my nutrition toolkit. I'll link to that down in the description. But what we're looking at here is 221 to 725. He was in that 190.5 average, got down to 171.6. So just wanted to show that those numbers were there. Took him 22 weeks. And the reason why a lot of times your goals are going to take longer than you think is because life happens. This guy had a wedding, passing of a family member, traveled 60% of the year for his job. And so to lose 20 pounds during that time is super impressive. And if you're doing that, that's super impressive. It's definitely doable during challenging times, but don't try and feel like you need to lose 20 pounds in 12 weeks. Otherwise, you're going to set yourself up for failure and frustration. So anyway, he got to 171. And then life was happening, but we still continued to work to trend down. I think here's 160. So 722 would be right here where we see 171. 222 started at 191, 722 got to 171, continued to lose weight, got to the lowest at 162 here. And that's where we decided, hey, let's go into a muscle building phase. You see that uptake here, mini cut, uptake here. And then there's just been a number of different phases that we've gone, and also just life happening. So now we're at July 2024, sitting at 175, which is only 15 pounds down from where he was earlier, but it's a completely different body composition. So now let's say your goal is to add muscle and you're, a leaner dude, maybe you're a younger dude, or you're just someone who's always had a hard time building. I'd spend time gearing up, make sure you get everything, and then boom, muscle building. This is 5 months. And what you want to be looking at here is 1% of your body weight a week. It might be 0.5 if you've been training for a long time and you want to really make sure that you minimize the amount of fat you put on your body. But in a building phase or a bulking phase or a muscle building phase, you will be putting on fat. Your nutrition, your sleep, your training intensity will determine how much of that is fat. And that's where you'll see the terms dirty bulk, or it's like, hey, you put on 20 pounds, but 3 of those were muscle, 17 was fat. Make sure that your nutrition's dialed in during these phases so that you don't just put on a bunch of weight and make it harder to lose weight in the future. So 155, 160, 164. So we're looking at a pound gained per week. And then 168, 172, 174. Mini cut, boom, get back to a leanness that you feel confident at. 174, 178, 182. Caveats here. So like I said, training age is going to dictate this. If you're, let's say you're watching this, you're 16 or you're 22 and you're new to the gym, new to training, you can probably get away with being in a bigger calorie deficit because your body is naturally lean. You're probably a lot more active than someone who's 45, and giving yourself that extra energy and then going and training hard is going to be a great environment for your body to build in. If you're like, I'm 33, I would probably not target as big of a surplus just simply because I'm a little bit more, I'm actually pretty active considering what most guys at 33 working desk jobs do, but I have also been training for 15 years. So it's not going to be as easy for me to go and add weight and add muscle versus someone who is more of a newbie. The way I would think about this is like Call of Duty. Level 45 to level 50 takes a long time, but level 1 to level 20 happens in like 7 games. So training works a lot of the same way. Those first 2 years of you training, you're going to be able to progress really quickly, and then things do slow down a little bit. Mini cuts are optional based on perceived leanness, measurements, performance, and how comfortable you are in your body. I want to pull up or focus on this image here of the guy in the middle. So this is 141 to 167, 10/30, 2020 to 11/2, 2022. So about 2 years, 16 pounds added. There were different phases where we were focused on different things. But the thing that I wanted to call out here is his chest, and this is harder to see than I want it to be, but when you're in a muscle building phase, you want your torso inches and measurements to remain pretty similar so that you're not adding weight to your storing fat around your midsection. But you do want to see your chest, your arms, your hips, your legs growing. So he's got 3 or 4 inches in his chest, in his hips, but his navel over the course of 2 years went up 1 inches. You see, there's a little bit more fat on his frame, but significant more muscle. And he's still he's still very lean given his, 20 pounds that he added or 16 pounds that he added over this time frame. And then here's an example on the right of a mini cut. We got him up to, I think, 202. And then in the span of like 8 weeks, he went down to 175. Might have been 12 weeks, but got down to 175 very quickly. And this was after his muscle building phase of 5 months. So here's kind of an example of what this would look like. Sitting here in a little bit of maintenance, then we go to focus on building. So September 2023, he's at 183. January 2024, he's at 205. He, in this particular instance, went on deployment. And so then we see some numbers coming in here that, he lost weight while carrying a bunch of military gear and, doing missions. So it makes sense that he would build muscle. And this is part of the intention too, is that we wanted to get him as strong and build as big of a foundation as possible, knowing that he would lose weight when food isn't as available, when the gym isn't as available, and he's really just focused on, serving the country. So his weight came down. We see some bouncing up and down, and now we're trying to get him back into that building phase. And so he's at 185, but his 185 in June 2024, it's very different than his 183 in September. And we can see that in the performance numbers from a training standpoint and in his body composition. Should you build or cut first? So that's what we wanted to talk about, but I wanted to cover these in the context so that you get a sense as to how to think about this. So if you are an experienced lifter, and this 16% is going to be dependent on the individual, but if you are over 16%, then I would cut. Females, if you're over 23%, then I would cut. 3,500 calorie deficit for the week, that's 500 per day. And then if you are inexperienced, so that should be, then you would go, or I guess, no, this is experienced. So experienced lifter, if you are less than 16%, then I would build. Females less than 23, then I would build. So I might have said this backwards. So if you are over 16 or over 23, then you would cut. If you are under 16, under 23, then I would build. That build is going to be anywhere from 200 to 250. I think this is like 100 divided by 7 is probably like 120. So you're going in a slight surplus if you're an experienced lifter. Experienced lifter, if you're like 8 to 16% and you're at a leanness that you feel really comfortable at, this is where I would say I'm at. Then you're going to go more maintenance. You might eat intuitively and really just focus on training well and have other priorities in your life. And then when you get to a point where like, hey, I want to focus on something, then you would choose obviously your mission, your target, and set the phase that you want to be in. But keep in mind, so 16% is it's an arbitrary number. Some people are naturally really lean and they can build muscle, feel good, have a ton of energy at 11%. Some people, it's 15%. Some people, it's 18%. Some people feel really good aesthetically at 20%. It's going to be super dependent on the individual. So don't take this as a hard fast. It has to be 16%. You could go get a DEXA scan, see what those numbers are, and then kind of gauge off of your measurements, your performance, how you feel comfortably in your body, and then make an assessment there. But just know that you could be, like I said, 13% and feel like absolute trash because your natural set point and what your body naturally feels good at is maybe 16%. And being in a bigger deficit has you, seeing performance decreases, sleep decreases, your libido decreases. So keep that in count when you're looking at these. If you're obese or new to exercise, I would really say cut. Get the weight off, target 0.8 grams per pound of body weight and protein, walk a lot, follow a progressive training plan, and your body is going to change. If you are skinny with excess fat and new to exercise, this is where you could cut. You could also just eat at maintenance, focus on maintaining your weight, but the new stimulus of training and getting in more protein is going to help body composition significantly. And that's where that skinny fat can turn into more of like, hey, my weight's the same, but my body composition is completely different. I would keep protein higher here just to make sure that you've got plenty of protein if you're in that range. How to set calories, and actually one caveat here too: obese. So targeting zero point 0.8 grams per pound of body weight. If you're 300 pounds, zero point 0.8 is going to be a ton. So you might then target, hey, what do I want my target weight to be, and set your protein at that. So if you're, let's say your target weight's 200, set it at 0.8 of 200 or at 200. How to set calories. So first thing you got to do is figure out what your maintenance is. This is going to be the best option. So track your calorie intake, track your body weight. If you ate 2,800 calories week 1, and then you went to 2,300 calories the next week, and you saw a 1.1 calorie or 1.1 pound drop, you're in a deficit. If you see average weight going up of 0.5 pounds over the course of 2 weeks, you're in a surplus. If it's under 0.5, either direction, then you're in maintenance. If you are under or beyond 0.5, then you are in a deficit. So that's how you can kind of gauge, all right, based on this intake, what am I at? Setting your macro targets. So fat loss, roughly 500 calories below maintenance, protein at 1.1 to 1.2 grams of pound per body weight, fat 15 to 25%, carbohydrates is going to be the remaining. This is going to be dependent on the individual. This is not a hard, fast number. Some people are insulin resistant, or they need to make sure that they're having less carbohydrates because of prediabetes or something to that effect. Some people need more fat to help with their hormones or their brain fog. Some people enjoy having a higher protein diet because they can just eat meat all day. Some people are vegetarian and don't have as much protein options. And so it's a little bit harder for them to hit that number. This is where it depends and you're an individual really applies, but this is a great range to start with and then see what works for you. Now, if you're in a building phase, protein doesn't need to be as high. Your body has plenty of energy and resources. It's going to take energy from your blood sugar. It's going to take energy from fat. It's going to take energy from muscle. If you're in a calorie surplus, it's very hard, or very unlikely rather, for your body to break down muscle tissue when it has adequate energy and resources in the form of blood sugar in your body and excess fat. Set fat 20 to 30%. Carbohydrates will be the thing that you see jumping up a ton, which is great. It's going to fill your muscles with glycogen. You're going to be able to train really hard. You're going to have massive pumps, and you're going to feel great in the gym during this time. Maintenance 0.7 to 1.2. This is where you may not need as much protein if you're just maintaining, and you may not need as much of a training stimulus. That is going to be, again, a completely different video, but protein 0.7 to 1.2, fat 20 to 40%. Again, this is where it really is dependent on the individual. Maybe you're carb cycling, maybe you enjoy a higher fat diet, and that helps you be adherent because carbs are really easy to overeat. And all of a sudden you go from one slice of pizza to 5, or fries, you just love. And so you're like, hey, if I keep fats lower or keep carbs lower, I cut out some of those foods a little bit more, still have them in moderation, but then it makes it easier to hit targets. A couple other pillars I like to think about: calorie balance. So calories is going to impact the scale going up and down. So calories in, calories out will impact the scale going up and down. But a lot of times people want to feel good, and they're looking at something more subjective than just a number on the scale. I'd say that's a very healthy approach. So macronutrients and a training stimulus is going to impact the body composition. If you only had fats and carbs and no protein and trained hard, not going to see the same composition as if you had protein really high. So that's something to keep into account. And if you had macros in the perfect spot but didn't train at all, you're also going to see a different body composition. Micronutrients and stress management is going to impact the health and function of the metabolism and how you feel. If you are deficient on fiber or vitamin D, or not getting enough iron, like there's a number of different things that if you're not getting it in your diet, you're going to feel it in your body, and it's going to impact how your cells function. That impacts how your metabolism functions. So that's where food quality is super important. And not to go on too much of a rant, but if you're super low in calories, the bioavailability of nutrients in 1,600 calories means that you got to be super on point with the foods you're putting in. Because if you're having 1,600 calories of Twinkies, you're leaving out a lot of vitamins and minerals that your body's not going to get. So when you're in a surplus, or when you have a lot more fat on your frame, then you got a lot more nutrients for your body to pull from. All right, tracking progress week to week. I think this is the last slide. So what we're looking at here is Cutting, you're aiming to at 0.5 to 1 pound of body weight per week for leaner individuals, 1% of your body weight per week for heavier individuals. Building, adding 0.5 to 1 pound of body weight per week. Maintenance, just kind of trying to maintain your weight up or down 2 or 3 pounds. The signs that you were looking for to measure this as well: weekly measurements, tape measures around the body, monthly photos, how clothes fit, and performance in the gym. And then one of the best resources that I've found and what influenced a lot of the macros on this is going to be the Muscle Strength Pyramid by Eric Helms. And then a lot of people ask the question of what does, when should I focus on bulking or building muscle or losing fat? Dr. Mike Israetel had a good answer on this video with Greg Doucette, and a lot of his stuff on Renaissance periodization is a great resource to follow as well. So that is everything. Questions, drop them down below. If you dig this, subscribe and leave a comment if this brought you value. And I'll catch you guys on the next Trooper Transmission.